Hi there, and welcome to Crowning, where birthing is a portal to your power. My name is Siobhan Duras, and I'm a full spectrum doula, a childbirth educator, and a spirit baby medium, transforming fears of childbirth and helping parents rise as the leaders of their families that your ancestors have been praying for. This week, we're going to be exploring parenting as a practice of social justice, fertility as it relates to the current US events, and I'll be answering the question of how old is too old to have a baby, with a few tips of what you can do if that's a concern of yours. I'll be honest, it feels very emotionally intense right now. I have felt very emotional preparing for today's stream. The way that I've been preparing, we're only 3 episodes in, but the way that I've been preparing is by just noticing what's going on, reading the questions coming in, the feedback from last week, as well as just sitting with what's going on and what's coming up for me in terms of the wider web that current events fit within. And so it's January 28th, 2026. When I speak to current events in the US where I am at, I am coming to you from San Francisco, California, aka occupied Ohlone land. And last Saturday, the world witnessed a well-documented execution of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by ICE, what does it even stand for? Immigration enforcement. Although this person was a US citizen, a white man, an ICU veterans hospital nurse, that is the big topic right now, and for good reason. And people are changing their tune. Unfortunately, and this is what we'll get into today, these are things that have been happening to Black people and descendants of enslavement for centuries here, Indigenous people for centuries here, Indigenous people now. And I personally like to reframe from immigrants, especially when we're talking about the stereotypes of undocumented people from Central America. Um, I like to reframe that as like those are our Indigenous people of these lands in the Americas. Um, and yeah, it's just I already feel myself getting a little nervous. I feel honestly, my vision is kind of just like a little jumbly. There's a lot happening, and these escalations of colonial and patriarchal violence have been mirroring in my personal life and my body in many ways, just on a personal level this past week. And I know that I'm not the only one experiencing that and feeling that. I've been sharing both online and behind the scenes around I'm calling it an initiation right now, an initiation of the work that many of us have been putting in the last few years to untangle from the remnants of colonialism in our bodies and our relationships. And in fact, that is something I talk a lot about, is just the ways that the personal extends to the collective. And yeah, I feel like I've been like oscillating and like zooming in and out between the personal experience with this, with the collective experience and the pain of that. And we're feeling all of it. Hey, Jamie, thanks for joining live. So, before we jump into all of that, I just want to take a few breaths together. And I even pulled a card today that was very, very relevant. I feel energy moving. I just had a little burp, and I'm going to have a little water because energy is moving, energy is in motion. That is what I'm trying to move through. And, this is a little bit of my way of coping, is by sitting with the wider web of what we're existing within. And so, yeah, let's take a sip of water. In fact, I've been eating so much water, my regular cups won't do, and I have the biggest jar I could find for yeah. So that's what I've got going on here. I also made a second coffee, feeling like I needed that. And now that I'm looking at it in front of me, I'm like, I don't think that's actually a great idea for me, in terms of inserting more caffeine. So let's just take 3 breaths together here today and arrive wherever you're at. Just pause with me just for these 3 breaths, inviting you to just arrive here in this space together. With your exhale, releasing sound, letting those vibrations move more energy as well. Another breath. And a third breath. And this is where I normally will ring my bell. And on soft power gatherings, I'll say we are now tapped into the soft power frequency. And even though this is not a soft power official gathering, that frequency is for everything. And the soft power frequency, if you're unfamiliar, is that frequency of our creative power, our creative sovereignty, and our ability to participate in change. So let's get into it. I'm going to pull up the card that I pulled today and just start there for us because, actually, sorry. First, I'm going to share the rainbow of readiness. This is just a little self assessment to offer you before engaging. Like I said, the articles I was sifting through, and just to give you a heads up so you can consent if you want to read through and participate in this at this moment, is we're going to be talking about ICE. The article headlines that I'll be pulling up have to do with 2025 being the deadliest year for ICE. We're going to be touching on a 2020 whistleblower in a Georgia immigration detention center that has to do with sterilization, as well as the US's history of forced sterilization in this country, and how that inspired Nazi Germany. And really, the point that I want to make is that the term Nazi is getting thrown around a lot right now, and it's important to bring us back that they were inspired by what the US was doing, not the other way around. And so reconnecting that full circle to the responsibility, especially if you're a person with white colonial ancestry, European settler ancestry in the US, I think that reframe is super important. And I actually have that ancestry myself. That's something I've learned in the last few years. Although my dad was adopted by an Irish family that immigrated here to San Francisco. He was adopted, and when we've done some DNA testing, and that's a whole other topic that has its own issues, there are settlers that came quite early here. And that's the part of my legacy of why I do what I do and talk about what I try to talk about. So, on the rainbow of readiness, you don't have to be perfect. I'm at about a 2. I'm at maybe like a 1.5. The general scale is actually more in a 1 to 10. This being kind of the safer zone in general. Even if you're underactivated, might have delayed response, emotional withdrawal, getting close to shutting down. That's just kind of that area for you to check in with yourself if you want to take in more information right now, or if you want to go do another practice to move energy before engaging. I want to shout out, I've got my Ancestor Sugar Baby shirt on today by Soul Bloom from the Soul Bloom shop. And her YouTube page has Qigong practices And I mentioned soft power, and if you have not heard of soft power, you can go to withsoftpower.org, and there are free gatherings where we co-regulate and learn and practice things so that we can get us back into this like more 2 to 4 range. And so overactivated might have heightened anxiety, difficulty focusing, tears or rapid speech. That is, I've been in this area, to be very honest. I don't think I felt quite at a 3 since before last week. As I said, a lot of these things are feeling and showing up in deeply personal ways. So that's that. And now I want to bring us to a little, and you can pause if you're not ready at this time and join me again. So now let's move on to a little tarot reading. I pulled a card today, and the card is the Justice card, and I am a tarot reader. And tarot, oracle cards, these are considered divination practices, and they're things that really support me on my journey of connecting with my power. And they're things that I often suggest to folks, even doula clients, as tools for building that trust in your own intuition and even connection with your spirits and ancestors. So if you have questions about that, you can ask that on the Spirit Doula hotline as well if you're like wondering what tools can support you. And there's a lot of rumors and opinions on how to engage with these things. So that probably is something I'll want to touch on eventually. But for today, I pulled the Justice card, and I felt called to pull this book off my shelf, which is called Tarot for Pregnancy, a companion for radical, magical birthing folks. This is by Brittany Carmona Halt with art by Kimberly Rodriguez. And I bought this book a few years ago. It is a really cool, let's see, I have the full book right here. It's a pretty big book that gets into reading the tarot if you are a pregnant person, or thinking about the topic of pregnancy. It gives a whole lot of insights and prompts for how to read the tarot from that specific lens. And I was so happy that Brittany included something about justice because it's super duper relevant. So this is really sweet. It looks like a multi-generational circle family holding hands, and there are scales here. Justice is the 11th card in the major arcana, and it is associated with the sign of Libra if you're into astrology. And I love this question here by Sarah T. Cargill. Does the justice you advocate for publicly mirror the justice you practice privately? Do the rules you live by to navigate the external world align with your internal code of ethics? I'm really appreciating this card and understanding why it's showing up this week, because when we are feeling powerless in a big world, there is this, that's becoming a more common like tactic of like, okay, well, what's within my power? What's within my power? How can I do this within my world? And I think what we're seeing right now, and what I've noticed online in a lot of discussions and opinions about this, is many people are demanding that folks say publicly and speak publicly and frequently about what they're doing. And I do, I can't really tell what other people what to do. It feels right for me to use my platform in this way. But also, we don't know people's situations, and why they may not. And also being online is one way that I can personally be more engaged with the collective, because I am a solo mother, and being out at protests with my child is not really safe. and not really within my abilities. And so a lot of the work and the way that I show up for the collective is like this because I show up in a very intimate, um, personal, usually one to one or me with a family way in my local life. And there's a lot of other things to consider when I'm in a family home. My exposure to viruses is really important. And so um, being mindful of that is important. And so, yeah, I just want to like keep that in mind too, because I think that is such a fair, it's, there's people who have a desire to know what folks, especially folks they may be financially supporting or energetically supporting with their follows and likes and shares and bookings and purchases. Um, and then there's this other side of people who are like, that's not everybody's role. You don't know everything. But really deep down, sometimes I feel like that's a cop out. I feel like it's certain people who want to say, like, you don't know what everybody's doing. And I'm like, yeah, but what are you doing? Like and we just don't know. So I'm just saying this for myself, thinking out loud. I'm a person with judgments and biases. And I'm also a person that it even feels weird to say, like, I don't like I'm the person that sends to the mutual aid versus like putting a lot of energy into circulating it outside of like story shares, texting it to my group chats that I'm in and including it in my newsletter. Um, and then I kind of just keep it moving to my lane and what I've got to do. And that's also influenced by topics of or themes sparked by this justice card because I am experience a lot of interpersonal violence and injustice in my personal life with people that I am choosing to practice justice with privately. So I don't know, circular statement there, but I'm just going to read through this and inviting you to just sit with it. So you can close your eyes, just take it in and maybe notice what's coming up for yourself and try to do that without judgment of yourself. Maybe take a note if there's something that sparks in you of what you could be doing, how you could be practicing justice. And let's see. Justice is a call to action to utilize your parenthood path to get in more alignment with your ethics and live them daily. While we are all going to become ancestors one day, regardless of whether we procreate or not, the choice to continue your family tree is the choice to one day become somebody's direct elder. Is a family lineage you're a part of something you want to perpetuate? That's a big question. That's probably one of the biggest questions that people that come to me are working through, or that is what drives them is their answer to that. Because for most of us, it's no. For most of us, we do not want to perpetuate um, the cultures that we have that we grew up in for many of our families, and I obviously can't speak for everyone, and it's also not like a total thing for many of us. There's aspects that I love and I would love to carry on in my lineage, and then there are things, and pretty much all I think I can say all of those things link back to uh, colonial constructs like patriarchy, like, sexism, like purity culture, or power struggles, and dominance. Like, those are all things that are very alive in my lineage that I know I'm actively here to disrupt. And so, this is why parenting is a revolutionary act if you are doing it intentionally. And it's hard. It's really hard. I have a 7-year old. Um, I'm parent to one 7-year old who has experienced a lot of conflict in his homes and family so far in his life. And right now, 7 is like this big age where he's discovering his power and his voice and voicing his desires. And it can be so challenging for me to breathe through and be aware of the patterning that lives within me of how to respond to that. Because I was a kid who was challenging things and who disagreed with the norm, the normative culture of my family. And the ways that the adults around me responded was silencing, maybe even spanking, um, being grounded, just clear dominance without conversation. And that is something that I'm really, really trying to disrupt, even just yelling. And there's still moments where I have yelled and lost it and had to come back and apologize, which is something that is breaking a cycle, even just apologizing sincerely and taking care of myself as an active apology to care for my nervous system so that I don't get so overwhelmed. Um, to eat and nourish myself so that I have the presence to hydrate, to move my body, to stop. For me, I'll be really honest, for me, one was smoking cannabis and how it used to be something that helped me access peace and relaxation. And then it honestly made me pretty impatient when things would not fall into that like chill zone. I realized I think my patience was actually shorter. Um, I was more irritable and I was noticing that within myself. So that was another one I had to kind of heal through. Um, so back to this. Values driven pregnancy and parenting goes beyond teaching our kids to be kind. Let's see. If you are a person who holds white privilege, class privilege, or any other kind of privilege that has increased your likelihood of thriving in this world, you have the opportunity to use your journey to and in parenthood as an opportunity to become anti racist so that you do not continue to pass on the dangerous legacy of white supremacy to your lineage. Yep, I believe Brittany is a white person who wrote this. Let's see. For some of us, gentle, respectful parenting is going to be a means of breaking generational trauma. For parents who are descendants of enslaved people, body feeding can be a form of generational healing. And they're recommending the book The Big Letdown by Kimberly Seals Allers, which discusses the history of wet nursing during chattel slavery and the ways that that still impacts body feeding attitudes today. Yeah, that's a really important point to be made. Um, for some of us, prioritizing joy and letting our children be messy and curious will help reparent our inner child. No matter what it is, healing is a political act that will impact the next generation that you're birthing and raising up. And this is how, for the parenthood path, healing is an act of justice. Love that. Inviting anybody watching who is parenting or thinking about parenting to drop in the comments or the chat what it is that you are, how you can heal your inner child, what choice you can make. For me, one of them is not doing Saturday morning sports. And again, this is also personal. Um, I am healing my inner child and honoring my child's needs by not signing him up for Saturday morning activities because on Saturday mornings, he is tired. He wants to unmask and unwind and be in a space. And I felt guilty about that for a bit. And I realized that it's because I never rested on Saturday mornings. I grew up with three siblings with lots of sports and activities. And I remember days we had to get to the soccer field. And because of our age gaps, we would be like the first and the last game of the day, packing up a picnic to be at the soccer field the entire day. And I would be bored. I didn't really like playing soccer, honestly. That was my least favorite sport. Um, but by not doing and by also, protecting my kid when others give their opinions of what he is or isn't doing on a Saturday morning, it is healing my inner child who really just wanted to rest and be in my space and color and play in my room. Justice, let's get back to this. Justice might also be enacted in part by cloth diapering, body feeding, secondhand baby items, baby-led weaning instead of buying packaged baby foods, all things that are more environmentally sustainable choices. If you have questions about any of those things, I did cloth diapering for a bit. Um, Secondhand, there's tensions that come up with every single one of these, honestly. Secondhand baby items. I felt the shame of asking for cash so that I can get things secondhand versus everybody's urge to like want to give me new things. And that was its own like awkward disruption in my parenting journey, as well as baby-led weaning, which is the idea of your baby eating what the family is eating and cutting them in ways that are, um, yeah, just not making them special food or like purees, basically. And that one had its own journey as well. It was highly stressful for my mother to be around because it involves learning the difference between choking and gagging and the safety. It has a lot of safety and trust and restraint. It led to arguments. So, yeah, these are things as simple as how you feed your baby, how you diaper your baby. They are, these are, yeah, not only environmentally sustainable, but really evidence based and ancestral and all of that. So, your choices really can be political, even as simple as that. Um, Even simply looking at children as individuals who are human and parenting from them from that place is revolutionary compared to the way many of us were raised. There are many ways to begin choosing a new path. Electing a home birth, if that's accessible, makes sense for you. Working towards normalizing a shift back to a way of birthing before it was erased by colonization and funding. Excuse me, I'm going to mute for a second and cough. Oh no, it rained yesterday and now it's sunny, and I'm like, is this a 1 week a year? There's like 1 week every year I have to cancel everything because the pollen is like just attacking me. Okay, I think we can continue. There's so much work to be done, internal and external, to dismantle the devastating legacy of capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism. And every one of us has something to contribute and a call to answer. Love this, Brittany. Justice themes: doing the right thing, even if it's the hard thing, balance, integrity, living from your ethics, trusting your own discernment. Now, isn't that the theme of pretty much everything here? That is truly what I wish to do, what I wish to support everyone in doing. Um, and yeah, just wanting to create a space for people to do, trust themselves, live with their ethics, and do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing, like it says. So I want to offer this to y'all. If you're watching and you have, I'm going to use an oracle deck since that just feels more accessible to do live with y'all if you're not tarot readers. I'm going to use this Wild Mystic deck and try out this spread that she suggested. And so you can pause here if you want to grab your own, reach for that. If you're thinking about parenting in the future, if you're already a parent, I think this is really super relevant for parents, present parents. So this is Brittany's suggested spread to explore how you specifically are called to further justice through your parenting path. So it says, find the justice card, place it at the center. I do have mine. I'll give you this with the oracle deck though. What do I need? So below, oh yeah, so they want that center card. So below, what do I need to see in order to show up for justice in my journey to and in parenthood? What is my past or family legacy? What it needs to be healed for future generations? That's a big one I think about. Above, what guiding principle will lead me in my pursuit of justice? And ahead, how can I show up moving forward? So let's see. Here we go. Done? Yes. Yes, here we go. Okay, below. Oh. So, what do I need to see in order to show up for justice in my journey and in parenthood? I need to see kindness. Okay. Funny because it said kindness isn't everything, but for me, I need kindness to myself. I really, really need kindness to myself. And also, honestly, this is vulnerable, but kindness to my own mother because my mom, there's a cultural, as you may know, I'm biracial. So my mom's from the Philippines, and my father's white, and there's a kindness that I've needed to have because of the ways that speaking up for her is very difficult. Expressing emotion feels difficult. Um, I see that, and I think past versions of me were a little bit impatient, especially like the very feminist version of me who can see the systems and has learned about the systems of why things are. I have such a rage sometimes, especially when it comes to like patriarchal culture and how it lives in my family. And so this kindness is what I need to see to show up for justice. I need kindness for myself. Yeah. Behind what in my past or family legacy needs to be healed. Okay. Care. And it's got the sign of Cancer and a crab. And yeah, that is what I'm here to heal is what care looks like. Care beyond what I've called it in the past is like a performance of care of everyone saying I care and really trusting one another to name the ways that we feel cared for and showing up in that way. Above, what guiding principle will lead me in my pursuit of justice? Create, spider, create as a guiding principle to lead me in my pursuit. I do need to reframe it as an opportunity to create. That brings the play in, that brings in the possibility, um, which I've found is a more productive and generative fuel source than shame, guilt, even duty, oftentimes. And so, how can I show up for justice moving forward? Rebirth is the card that I got. The snake, we are closing out the year of the snake. And this is my way. This is my way of showing up, moving forward, rebirthing my family culture, assisting others in rebirthing themselves, rebirthing, being willing to rebirth. I do need to continuously remember that it's a cycle and that transformation brings me to one place for me to then gather, learn my next lessons, and not hold too tightly in case I need to release and rebirth once again. So, yeah, that is our connect segment of the show. I needed that honestly because, like I said, the next topics are just really upsetting. It's upsetting no matter how many times I've learned about it. And so, if it's your first time learning about the ways that um, the reproductive I don't know, control. I want to say rights, but it's like the denial of those rights has been so integral to this country. Take care of yourself. And so get your water, get a snack, pause if you need to. And now let's get into the ways that what's happening right now in the US with ICE is really an extension of what has always been part of the design of this country. And the simplest way um, to connect it is when I think just simply about the word capitalism and how capital really has to do with people and the human, even the word like human resources. Have you ever thought about that? Of just like, we're literally admitting that the people, it's a little dehumanizing. And that's an understatement considering the origins of this country and how we got ahead and led an industrial revolution. It all came from dehumanizing and um, owning humans and the history of enslavement and the transatlantic slave trade, all of that. So, our first thing I want to look at is a little. I'm not going to read the full thing this week on some of these because they are pretty intense and long and detailed, but as always, everything will be linked after the show so that you can sit with it, especially if you are a spiritual person who likes to speak names out loud. That's something I did while preparing, is just reading out loud the names of many of these people um, mentioned. And so here we go. Mm, Share screen to this window. Okay. So 2025 was ICE's deadliest year in 2 decades. Here are the 32 people who died in custody. So 32 people died in ICE custody, making it the agency's deadliest year in more than 2 decades, as the Trump administration moved to detain a record number of people. Some of those who died in detention had arrived recently seeking asylum, which many of them are seeking asylum due to things in their home countries and indigenous lands that are directly caused by the US. Um, Others had arrived years ago, some as young children. Some had been apprehended on criminal charges or had served time for convictions. Others had been picked up in the administration's indiscriminate ICE raids. They died of seizure, heart failure, stroke, respiratory failure, tuberculosis, or suicide. Some died at detention centers and field offices, others after they had transferred to hospitals, but were still under ICE custody. In some cases, their families and lawyers have alleged they died of neglect after repeatedly trying and failing to get medical care. The number of deaths, 32, matched the previous record set in 2004. So the agency was holding 68,440 people in detention in mid December. Nearly 75% of them had no criminal convictions. December was also the deadliest month in ICE custody. 7 people died. And I'll be honest, 32 is the number that we know of on record because there are people missing still. There are people who, yeah, my assumption is that the number is actually far greater. And if they're still alive, many people are being illegally held. And all of this is connecting back to um, the history of enslavement in this country. So, we've heard about the conditions, and this article, I'm just going to scroll through it so you can see some dates and names and faces. And just sending love to every individual named here, breathing through any emotions that we're feeling that connection to, yeah, just all of these humans. And there's such this, yeah, I'm gonna wait. Okay, so that just felt important to do. Even just scrolling through for a moment only shows us 32 people. I think about the very long um, list of Palestinians that have been killed in this genocide. I think of the names of people and children in Congo that will never know. And so that's just 32 people. Um, 32 humans, and looking at their faces, it's just we need to make it real sometimes, and that's really why I try to open up with that practice to ground us into that humanity. Hi, Heaven. Today we are right now looking at the connection between ice and, yeah, the history of how this relates to reproductive justice. And so the next story that I'm bringing up, and this is a very long one, so I have like summary notes on here. I'm just going to leave the image up here for us because it's super duper long. And so in 2020, there's a whistleblower named Dawn Wooten. I believe she's Filipino American too. That was a whistleblower, which is like somebody who basically blows the whistle on what's going on behind the scenes. Um, and they often put themselves at risk, put their jobs at risk, maybe even their lives at risk to share with the public what has been going on. And so Dawn shared, um, made this claim that there were mass hysterectomies going on in this US immigration detention center in Georgia. And so this launched a investigation led by Senator John Ossoff in Georgia. Um, and it was an 18-month bipartisan investigation. So that means both parties were involved, Democrats and Republicans. And they issued a 108-page report reviewing 541,000 plus pages of records, interviewing 70 plus witnesses. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of the summary here. So, so in okay, I'm going to read off what we have on the screen. So, the investigation uncovered 85 credible reports of medical neglect, including cases that reportedly led to life-threatening injuries and complications, 82 credible reports of denial of adequate food or water that led to malnutrition or dehydration. These senators agreed unanimously that there were inhumane things going on. Now, the one thing that was not confirmed or substantiated, we should say, I guess, with evidence, was this accusation of mass hysterectomies. And so, hysterectomies is a procedure that removes the uterus from someone's body. And they found that there were, according to their research, only two that were performed by ICE. But what they did find confirmed was that people with uteruses were being subjected to, in their words, excessive, invasive, and often unnecessary gynecological procedures. There is a doctor named Mahendra Amin who was basically the one who they agreed was not properly vetted. He was not board certified. He had already been sued in 2013 by Georgia officials in the Department of Justice for Medicaid fraud for ordering unnecessary and excessive medical procedures. And this person was allowed to medically abuse people detained in this Georgia center. So he performed, it says, well, while this center only held only 4% of women in ICE custody, he performed 82% of DNC procedures on ICE detainees nationwide, 93% of all contraceptive injections. Sorry, I'm going to mute again. Ugh, I don't know. I think it's the pollen post rain yesterday. Um, yeah, so this person confirmed excessive unnecessary gynecological procedures, confirmed consent violations. He was continually doing procedures on people who did not understand what was being performed. One woman, Pauline Bingham from Cameroon, was shocked to discover that he had removed a fallopian tube during a procedure for a totally different issue. And yeah, it's consistent with a history of forced sterilization of marginalized populations. So that's what I'm kind of getting into here and what I'm going to pull up next. And really, my point is to loop us back because one thing that will be named here is that, you know, who's inspired by the US's history of forced sterilization was Hitler. And Nazi Germany had a 1933 sterilization law um, that was modeled on the US laws and inspired by California eugenicist C.M. Goff. The Nazis sterilized 360 to 400,000 people using US models. So, again, this will be linked after for those interested. But coerced sterilization is a part of America's history. You don't need to go far back to find examples. Used as a means of controlling undesirable populations, immigrants, people of color, poor people, unmarried mothers, the disabled, the mentally ill, federally funded sterilization programs took place in 32 states throughout the 20th century. This is a really intense thing to read, and I'm going to just kind of scroll through it to arrive here, the eugenics movement. So eugenics, and I want to talk about this because I mention it a lot. Eugenics was a commonly accepted means of protecting society from the offspring of those individuals deemed inferior or dangerous. Now, this is even actually a generous way to put it because yes, there are and were and continue to be methods to stop the reproduction of, quote, undesirable populations. And also, this pushes into the shadows what they really want, which is a continued um, production of humans of those populations. Things like the school to prison pipeline, things like um, the pipeline into the military. There are specific populations that, while they may not want them to reproduce and be well, they still need and rely on to reproduce so that we can still have enough people who will work low wages, who will enter into legal enslavement, which is the prison system, and who will serve in the armed forces on behalf of the US military. So I'm going to let that lead us into um, I think we understand the point here that this is what has been going on for, and this is only into the 1970s, because if we want to go all the way back, like, come on, forced breeding was a pinnacle of um, US enslavement. So it says here, while California's eugenics programs were driven in part by anti-Asian, anti-Mexican prejudice, Southern states also employed sterilization as a means of controlling African American populations. Mississippi appendectomies was another name for unnecessary hysterectomies performed at teaching hospitals in the South on women of color as a practice for medical students. And yeah, they this goes back to also what was done to the genocide of Native Americans. And here in this PBS article I'll link gives you plenty of resources if this is something that speaks to you. And so, as it says here, issues of reproductive justice are still relevant today as state laws continue to restrict access to abortion and birth control. Deborah Reed writes, the concept of reproductive justice, which is firmly rooted in a human rights framework um, that supports the ability of all women to make and direct their own reproductive decisions. These decisions could include obtaining contraception, abortion, sterilization, or maternity care. Accompanying that right is the obligation of the government and larger society to create laws, policies, and systems conducive to supporting those decisions. And I don't say this to be negative, I say this to simply be factual. Um, it is genuinely not in the interest of the US government. And the reason why I'm going to steer us in the way I am from this point forward for the rest of the show is to actually sit with this reality that this is not something that benefits a country rooted in capitalism that must make profit, and therefore, similar to why the US will not outright oppose the Palestinian genocide because of what they stand to gain in terms of supporting Israel and occupying that land. This is the reality that we need to arrive at as we consider what's within our power for the future, of what expectations we set from our government, of what we are going to request and wait for, is my thought, what we're waiting for the government to give us. And where I'm going to steer us is to what is within our control, because this is the reason why we don't quite understand our um, fertility, our why our menstrual cycles are not considered, and even by our doctors kind of overlooked when they are um, not regular, as a, like, oh, that's fine, when truly those are one vital signs of your wellness. um, and because there are ways to control us, because so much benefits from us being disconnected from our reproductive capacities, as well as dependent on them to tell us what to do. The infertility industry, it benefits and profits off lack of understanding. And there are many, many doctors out there who do not even understand how to track a cycle, what the signs of our fertility are. And so it is very specifically by design. And I don't want to say that just to discourage us and depress us, because there's a solution we do have within our ability to learn. This is something that I believe, and why I chose to sit in the reproductive justice space beyond, there's legacy, there's, I think, just like my calling is in this space, but one of the ways that I've justified and embraced it is because it's one of the areas where we are quite capable of learning and understanding, and in the whole web of control of this country right now, this is one that many of us have the opportunity to take our power back. So, how do we do that? Hmm, do I want to go? Let's see. So, how do we do that? Because I'm going to move us into this question of how old is too old to have a baby? And before I get really into the answer to that, I want to take us to something a little more positive in terms of it's not depressing news. We're going to turn us a little back to our power now. Um, because if, as evidence has shown, if the US system, whatever you want to call it, is obsessed with controlling our fertility, controlling our reproductive outcomes. Last week we got into mailed abortions. Abortion rights are obviously directly connected to this because they want to undereducate us while also preventing people from getting abortions with the knowledge that people who are wealthy have always been able to get them. People who are educated will always have their way to do it, but there are targeted populations, again, back to the eugenics movement. There are targeted populations that they specifically want uneducated because um, those babies are more likely to go into systems that will ensure they are becoming the category of humans that this system is very comfortable dehumanizing, commodifying, and owning. Um, and I do believe that that is what's going on with ICE right now. I do wholeheartedly believe that thousands of people are missing because they are in, whether you want to call them concentration camps, um, prisons, and how they've been able to do that is by appealing to our moral belief of who they are. They've been able to succeed at this because they've convinced many people that usually are right wing for, and I don't want to get so much into political lines because I do see the ways that Democrats also are falling for this on a lesser scale. Right wingers may buy more of like they're criminals, but Democrats might, or the liberal leaning people also look away for their own reasons and also have not been activated until the death of Alex Preddy, who was a white US citizen, a man. And so we all have to take accountability for the ways that we have allowed ourselves to dehumanize certain populations for our own comfort. And I bring that back to the nervous system because that is a tool of the nervous system, is that we are genuinely incapable at a certain point of being open to things. And again, I'm going to throw back up the rainbow of readiness because it says here, like, this is where optimal functioning and growth can happen. And think about the things that are designed to underactivate, overactivate us at all times, that literally physiologically, neuroscientifically prevent us from being able to optimally function and accept the information we see before us, digest it, and let it move us into change. That's why I try to sandwich this information with bringing us into this place first, because I know that it's not just that people don't care and want to check out because they're upset. It is because our brains are literally not capable of processing it. So there's this investment in keeping us underactivated, overactivated, highly emotional, attacking one another for what we are and aren't saying publicly, and this interpersonal rage of when someone harms me, how I only see the personal, and I'm personally, I'm balancing that I kind of tend to utilize this web that that's everything's connected to. That's like a coping mechanism for me sometimes where I'm like, "Oh, this person harmed me, but I understand it because patriarchy XYZ." And I'm also working on the flip side, and I think both are super essential to acknowledge our personal feelings and let that be this portal into the collective experience that can inform um, the way that we live our lives, the way that we make parenting a justice practice, or our pregnancy and birth choices a justice practice. Okay, so let's just talk about the three primary fertility signs for people who have never seen this. And this is my favorite resource. I shout her out all the time. Shout out to Nicole, learnbodyliteracy.com. And Nicole draws these herself as well, and has offered such a generous resource to the public. The YouTube channel is incredible. She offers one on one consulting for um, what to do for your specific information, but she is so amazing at putting many, many things here for self education and learning. And she's a big inspiration to how I want to show up in my work as well. So, the three primary fertility signs, and again, my intention of sharing this is because as so much has been put into us not understanding, here's just like a little digestible tidbit for you to learn a little more about your body, especially if you are somebody who has a uterus that has sex with people with semen. This is a way to just understand and protect yourself. But it also, even if you don't have sex at all, this helps to really just learn about your inner cycle. And I'm going to shout out someone else after who has more to say on that. So the three primary fertility signs are cervical secretions, aka discharge, as many of us know it as, cervical position, and basal body temperature, which is that temperature when you're waking. So I just love how visually simple and helpful this whole website is. So, cervical secretions. During the menstrual cycle, the cervix responds to fluctuating ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone, causing your body to release different kinds of secretions. Cervical fluid is our main diagnostic fertility sign. It tells us in the moment about our fertility status. So, this will, when you start to learn more, and yeah, I'm sure this is going to get into it. Here we go. You can do that by looking at your underwear, by your tissue, by checking your cervix or your vulva, um, and charting it based on the kind of like texture here. So, shows here, here's when you're menstruating. That is when blood is being secreted and shed from your uterus, the uterine lining. And then right after that, you might have dry, no discharge those first few days. And again, the most important thing and why this is an essential resource to me is that there are apps and resources that get it semi right, but what they don't account for is the world that we exist within and the ways that we're all different. I have closer to a 34-day cycle. And so apps that chart a 28-day cycle are going to do me dirty if I am in a fertile window and I'm going off of this idea, if I'm just knowing like, oh, then my fertile window's over, I might just be ovulating and might be extremely fertile at that moment. And as somebody who's become pregnant twice, yeah, that's important for me. Um, and the other thing about those apps too is that apps in general, if they are free, you are the product, the price. I forget. Somebody said that before. It's just like free charting apps. They will sell your data, and right now, it's a no. And so there is one that I trust that is called Read Your Body, and I think it's like maybe $2, $3 a month. Those are the ones that is one where your data is safe. But I also will encourage you on this website, you can access journals and learn how to chart with the paper and pen the good old way so that nobody can find it. Stardust is one I actually, thanks for mentioning Stardust because I want to, they are allegedly safer. I need to look more into it though. So I have heard that. Have you looked up at all what that data is like? And is it paid? Can you remind me? Is that a paid app? In general, the free ones are the red flag. So like Flow is a big one. I used to use, okay, cool. I want to look more into Stardust too then. Says they were very against tracking and sharing that info and with paid options. Cool. So yeah, I'm curious about that. I've heard good things, but I haven't done it myself because I'm a paper tracker. And just to be honest, right now, I'm pretty like in tune with observing things, and I am not super concerned right now at that. Um, so I got to learn a little more. I used to use Temp Drop, which was like an armband that I wore when I sleep, and in the morning when I sync it, it tells me my basal body temperature, and that was convenient for me. Um, but yeah, so this shows you right here, moist, white, sticky is um, these bars are kind of indicating your, let's see, your like fertility, um, your fertile quality, as they as Nicole calls it. And then wet, clear, slippery, that is when you are fertile myrtle, as my doctor called me once. So then the second sign is their cervical position. This one can be a little tougher to track. For me personally, it's one that I really lean on the other two, but I would like to grow with a little bit more understanding of this, nuance. Like this is very personal and it involves you. Says cervix becomes softer to the touch, rises higher in the vaginal canal, and opens to secrete fertile quality cervical fluid. In fertile phases, it's harder to touch, falls lower in the canal, and becomes easier to reach with your fingers. So all of this is kind of like requiring your own intimate um, connection with your body, and totally understand that for some people, um, that is an area, depending on things that have gone on in your life, that you're not comfortable doing, at least not at this time. So this is an important understanding. But for me, what I found is that through the cervical fluid and through the body temperature, that's enough for me personally. So yeah, how we observe it, how we chart it, you can learn that here. And then we have the waking body temperature, aka basal body temperature. The hormonal event releases progesterone. It stimulates the hormone, which raises your body temperature after ovulation. And we call it the thermal shift. And so when a sustained thermal shift is observed, the window ends. So I think this might be using Read Your Body. These charts look like Read Your Body. Um, so yeah, they're taking their temperature here, and then there is this heightened window here, which pretty much aligns here with the dry cervical fluid. The increase in temperature pretty much shows that you're no longer in your fertile window. And if those signs aren't there, it's pretty much impossible to get pregnant. But, I'm not a doctor for you, so don't. It takes time to learn. And that's a big critique, a big critique of people for these methods. And it's valid, is that most people are not, again, I say this all the time, we're in a culture that intentionally distances us from our ability to be in tune with our bodies at this level for it to be accurate. And so You probably, while you're learning, will still want and need to use other forms of contraception while doing this. This is by zero means a comprehensive class on this, although I did do a class in 2021 called Body Literacy for Liberation, because I firmly do believe that this is one thing we can do within our control. So, there's all these resources here, other types of fertility awareness methods. If you mention it to your doctor, they may be like, oh, the rhythm method, that doesn't work. And they're referring to rhythm, which is like everybody has a 28-day cycle. I actually need to resurrect the Body Lit for Liberation class because my co facilitator, Jessica, shared her charts and explained from a standpoint of like a stressful event happened. I think her partner had gotten into a car accident and she could track that her ovulation came later that month. And it's really, really cool to see the body's intelligence of what um, how this fertility is and our cycles are connected to how safe we feel to procreate, um, the conditions that we might need to conceive and carry a pregnancy in terms of what our bodies need from us. And so we also see that during pregnancies closer to term, how depending on stress levels and even in labor, um, how those hormones in our body adjust to our sense of safety and our perception of safety to allow for baby to descend, to allow for ourselves to get pregnant. Um, this is why stress levels, and again, I like to focus on perception of safety because that also brings our power back a little as well. Um, that there are people, and this also includes that's like just because somebody gets pregnant doesn't mean they feel safe and are stress free. We know that's not true. So there's many, many, many layers to this, and ultimately learning your own body and your own language is going to be what keeps you in the power seat for your life. So that's that. Um, and on that, I want to just take us then into our question officially, which was, how old is too old to have a baby? How old is too old to have a baby? And so, pulling up my favorite, it's literally called Evidence Based Birth. It's my favorite resource for evidence based birth information. I need to figure out why I can't log in, but they have classes, blogs, podcasts, signature articles with tons and tons of topics. This is my go to resource. Rebecca Decker is amazing in what she shares and puts forward, and everything is always heavily cited. And um, it also helps to affirm the ways that racism and systemic injustice um, are evidence based threats to the impacts of them, right? So here it's actually all laid out in a podcast form so you can listen to this. But we have the one-page handout, and this is free. We'll look at it. But I encourage you, they ask for your email to do it, so I don't want to like put the whole resource out there if that's their boundary information wise. But let's take a look here. So the question of am I old to baby? I shared about this on threads and someone replied, I hate the term geriatric pregnancy. And I'm like, yeah, it's so rude, right? They call you geriatric for birthing age 35 or older. And so another term that's a little more progressive and less inflammatory that's used is the AMA, Advanced Maternal Age, AMA. So that's 35 or older. And this is really going to root us into the layers of it because it is true that our chances after age 35, that's evidence based, that the chances of conceiving and carrying pregnancies change. So let's see. Over the past 4 decades, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of people giving birth at age 35 or older. In the US, this started in the mid 70s and has continued to steadily rise over time. In 2018, 18% of birthing people were 35 and older, up from 15% in 2013, 11% in 2002, and 8% in 1990. So I wonder where we're at now since oh my gosh, 2018 is already 8 years ago. Yeah, advanced still feels geriatric sounding to you. Yeah, that's valid. That's valid. Um, So, yeah, older, all these words, they're nuanced because getting older is a blessing. It's also just factual, but also how do we speak about it with love and honor all of the very, very valid reasons that people are birthing later. And again, all of it connected to the political world that we exist within. So, meanwhile, it says here, meanwhile, the overall US birth rate per 1,000 females aged 15 to 44, as well as the teen birth rate and the birth rate for people in their 20s are at record lows. So, depending on your opinions, like we're at a record low of teen pregnancy. Apparently, the show, if y'all what was it called? Teen Mom on MTV. That was so scandalous when it came out, but since that show came out, apparently, I wonder if there's studies. I can look that up, probably, if there's actual studies supporting this, but the teen mom, numbers decreased since that show dropped, and I watched it, and let me tell you, made me never wanna be a teen mom, and also, I grew up with it. My sister is a teen mom. So when I turned 20 and I hadn't had a baby, my mom on my birthday, I remember, was like, "Congratulations, you broke a cycle." My mom, my sister, and my grandmother all had their first children under age 20, I believe. Um, And I still, not gonna lie, no disrespect, all respect to actual teen moms, but I had my son at 27, and at least in San Francisco, where people, like, all birth later for reasons that are gonna be mentioned here, I felt like a teen mom in some ways, and even now still, like, at my kid's school, I am, one of the younger parents there. It seemed like there was this jump from, like, actual teens, and then maybe people cooled it in their 20s, and then many people here at least are having their first children in their mid to late 30s and even in their 40s. So, yeah, there's also been an increase in the number of first babies born to people in the US who are 35 and older, from 7.4 in 2000 to 10.8 in 2018. The average age at first birth is now 26 years of age, a record high for the US. The average age at first birth has increased for all race and Hispanic groups. What? I need to look up why they always make Hispanic groups separate. Um, Anyways, look at this chart here. Birth rates per 1,000 women in specified group. So I'm okay, 15 to 19 here dropped. 20 to 24 dropped by a lot. Um, 25 to 29, all of these dropped, and then 30 to 34 rising, rising, and then still pretty low. 45 to 49, very, very low. And I think that is just like reasonable in terms of fertility. So, a similar trend is occurring within many high income countries. So, for example, in 2013, 20% of births in England and Wales were to people aged 35 or older, and 4% to people 40 years or older, compared to 6 and 1%. Let's see, what did Heaven say? You heard about teen pregnancies decreasing recently. Let's see. For sure. Is that what FS means? Including alcohol abuse, the new gen has the internet as their vice now. Yeah. I think the new gen is looking like, what the hell would I'm curious about that. Like, 1, the access to information, 2, the world that they're living in, 3, maybe even their parents' ability. I'm thinking too of like, what does this younger generations, like if their parents are Gen X, like their ability to even support that? I've been thinking a lot about that, about the impact of like how normalized it's been for many people to just have grandparents who help take care of their kids, whereas many but the grandparents are still working now. Somebody that was like a whole thing on I was seeing discussed online recently, was like talking about summer camps and what did kids do during what are kids doing in the summer when summer camps are like $500+ a week. Um, that's on the low end for me in a city. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like when I was younger, I remember my grandma was able to hang out with us. I have so many burps today. I told you already. I came on here feeling really, really low. I'm stabilizing and I'm feeling the energy move. Um, yeah, but I feel kind of weird burping on the stream. But whatever. That's what we're doing, I guess. Why is parenthood being delayed? The availability of birth control is partly responsible. However, birth rates have gone down in countries that do not use birth control. So it's not just that. So, there are this whole list of here higher education levels for women, working, cultural and value shifts lead more people to not feeling ready to have a child yet, lack of childcare, low benefit levels, policies that signal you cannot both be a wage earner and a mother, economic and housing uncertainty, unemployment, labor markets, medical reasons, and divorce. So let's get here to the evidence. Your chances of getting pregnant at 35 and older. As you age, the chance you'll get pregnant is reduced. For females, this decline begins, and females, remembering, again, this is evidence based. So females is simply referring to the sex for people with uteruses, and it is not the same as gender. So, I know we don't typically like to be reduced and called females, but in the reproductive world, um, that is usually how they speak on this website, at least. Um, so this decline begins slowly in the early 30s and speeds up in the late 30s and 40s. If you've been trying to get pregnant for about 12 months and have not conceived and are 35 and older and have not been able after trying for 6 months, it's usually recommended to see a care provider for evaluation of infertility. So this is a big one here. Females are born with all of the eggs we will ever have. The decline in fertility with age is due to a decrease in the number of eggs available for fertilization, as well as decrease in the quality of eggs. So let's touch on that. I love thinking about the fact that we're born with all of our eggs. And if you've never heard this, one of like something really trippy is to think about that if you're somebody that has carried eggs in your mother, how do I put this? Our grandmothers carried our mothers when they had all their eggs. And so our cellular life began in the womb of our grandmothers. Kind of cool and trippy to think about, right? So the quality of eggs is really important here because we also live in a toxic world that is what threatens things. So when we think, and the big thing we're going to get into here, and the big factor is that yes, while studies show that the likelihood of getting pregnant and carrying pregnancy decreases 35 and after, we also have within our abilities to increase through our nourishment and wellness practice and understanding our body sooner and keeping low stress and treating our menstrual cycles and our fertility as the vital wellness signs that they are, um, we can extend our reproductive life. We can extend our, um, increase our quality of our eggs. And I didn't actually pull up any receipts for this today, but there is increasing evidence that it actually a lot of things including this big debate about things like autism, that right now the supposed health, I don't know, people who supposedly care about health but don't, aka RFK Jr. uh, these are things they're like obsessed with autism, and people circulate misinformation all the time that that comes from like older mothers and women like not having children sooner, but it's actually more connected to sperm quality. And for a lot of situations, the issue is often sperm quality. So this whole thing is talking about assisted reproductive technology. I want to keep scrolling because here we go. Um, In addition to being cost prohibitive, there are significant racial disparities in access to IVF. Black and Hispanic people are less likely than white people to access assistive reproductive technologies like IVF. And so this book is really, is this a second? Oh no, this is somebody, a different book was mentioned, but Killing the Black Body is a really important book for birth workers. If you're curious about birth work or reproductive justice, I recommend reading this book. So, in summary, social, cultural, and economic factors, contraceptive options, and ART options are shaping the trends of pregnancy in parents at age 35 and older. Pregnancies with the use of ART tend to be among white, wealthy, heterosexual couples. Meanwhile, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, those with limited financial means, and LGBTQ plus individuals face more barriers in trying to build families with these technologies. So the rise, it says what's going on, options, contraceptive options, and social, cultural, and economic factors. Now let's go down here to what are the risks of being pregnant at an older age. One possibility is that the embryo will have Down syndrome, which happens when there's an extra copy of chromosome 21. According to the CDC, 1 in every 700 babies is born with Down syndrome, making it the most common chromosomal condition in live-born infants. The rate does increase with pregnant person's age. And so again, when we're looking at age, your reproductive age is not exactly the same as your living age number of years on Earth. We speed up our reproductive age depending on lifestyle factors. Genetics is one. Um, so these numbers here are statistical, keeping in mind the average statistical, um, wellness, lifestyle, etc. And especially we're talking about in the US here, who we don't have wonderful, um, there are many, many, many things as a result of capitalism and including eugenics that will, yeah, that influence this. So another big factor, let's see. Yeah, makes me think about how much right-leaning families have more children because of trad-wife values and just dealing with terrible partners, lifestyles, etc. Yeah, yeah, it's really true. I know you said that a little time ago, but wherever I was at when you said that, I'm like, yep, so true, bestie. It's really messed up. So it is true here that with, I think that's the main point I would love for you to take away in this is that these statistics naming the years of age can be separated to some degree from, I want to plant that thought for you of your years on earth does not have to equal your reproductive aging. Um, there's many things that age us, right? We look at people who drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes and what they've shown us in terms of how that shows in our aging. Um, Lifestyle things influence our aging. And so just, consider that when you're looking here that I actually want to say here too that if you're not willing to have a child with disabilities, you probably shouldn't have children, period, because that is always going to be a possibility. Um, children, people, all of us, it's like, well, that is almost everybody might find themselves disabled at some point in life, whether that's through conscious choices or outside influences. And so I just want to plant that there too, that if you're seriously concerned about your chances of having a disabled child, um, go deal with that first in terms of if you're ready for the possibilities, because there's so many factors in the world, and if you could become, I don't want to go into this territory necessarily, but we're all at risk of becoming disabled at some point. We're literally in year 5 of a mass disabling event, aka the COVID-19 pandemic. So there are increases of stillbirth. um, In the US, stillbirths are typically defined as losses that take place after 20 weeks of pregnancy. One way to look at the absolute risk, this is the actual rate of stillbirth among people of a certain age group. So this is kind of giving you a little 101 on how to even read statistics. So with relative risk, if a risk is 50% higher, it doesn't mean that the older person has a 50% chance of having stillbirth. Um, for example, if the risk is 2 per 1,000, then someone age 35, someone age 40 is 3 per 1,000. That's what a 50% risk is adding half of the actual risk. So again, we can get really freaked out when these numbers, if we haven't learned how to read these numbers, and even as someone who, learns took statistics and did I ever pass AP statistics? I don't think I did. But I was also a really bad student in terms of studying. So this is important to learn how to actually read the statistics. Um, what is the actual risk of stillbirth in pregnant people 35 and older? Um, in 2000, Jolly et al. Looked at the medical records of 358,120 people who gave birth at 18 hospitals in the UK, and they found people age 35 and over were at increase even after considering BMIs, ethnic groups, medical problems, and whether it's a first child. They did not specify their definition of stillbirth. This means that the babies could have been stillborn starting at any gestational age after 20 to 28 weeks. So 0.47% for 18 to 34 age range, and 0.61% for 35 to 40, and 0.81% for 40 plus. So again, these are not to say none of these things matter, but if you're comforted by numbers and statistics, is a 0.47% chance versus a 0.81% chance a reason to push yourself to accept a partner that's not going to be reliable and maybe stress you out? Like, there's all these other factors that I hear people who come to me concerned by when they ask, am I too old to have a baby? Well, I don't know you and your fertility. So start with tracking your cycle to even understand your fertility and your capacity. There are things and tests that you can do with your provider if you are concerned about your egg count, for example, or an egg quality, for example. Um, there, with all of this said, I just want to bring us back to, again, what's within your control and your intuition and your journey. And this is why I love doing spirit baby readings, because miracles happen, y'all. I had a client who was 40 years old, maybe 41 or 42, who had uterine cancer, who never even really wanted or planned to have children. And after fighting to keep her uterus, became pregnant unexpectedly, and she is like, "Oh my gosh, like, that is so wild. I can't believe that." And when I did this spirit baby reading, it was like, you change your destiny and miracles happen. And at the same time, Spirit has to move through matter. Spirit needs, this is like a, to me, a basic of like even witchcraft. That's like, it's, you are creating material conditions for spirit to move through, where, you know, when we put stuff on our altars and offerings, we're feeding spiritual energy with matter. And that can also be done with your body. And so don't ever underestimate the power of your belief, of your intuition. If you feel like this, I feel like I'm gonna have a baby one day. I've dreamt of it. I've wanted it my whole life, and in my heart, I know I'm gonna become a mother, but I haven't found my partner yet. And now you're getting into the 35 to 40 range here, where there is such a tiny difference. Again, we're talking about the difference of, where did it go here? 2 per 1,000 to 3 per 1,000. Please do not let that be the difference between settling for somebody who is going to, just because you think that you need someone to have a baby with. I see that a lot, and I get this is kind of a very like heteronormative take on this, but this is where a lot of my clients come from, is being like, well, I really want to have children, so I don't want to miss my chance by letting go of this person that, you know, is a certain way. Um, that is often why spirit babies come through, is to lead you away from them. And I've also had spirit baby readings where the baby said straight up, that is not my daddy. That is not my father. Um, and sometimes that's what people need to hear in order to move forward. I have had several clients like that who have contemplated ending a partnership, but really see parenting and birthing in their future. Um, and they think that by starting over again, maybe they've been with their partner for an amount of time that feels like, oh, like it would be giving up now to just let this go. And oftentimes your spirit baby is coming through because they want you to trust yourself, trust that they're there, and hear them say, that ain't my daddy. So I want to put it bluntly in that way. Um, I think I'm gonna wrap it up there. And if I didn't answer anything in the question of how old is too old to have a baby, you know, I don't. I think when we get into like literally what's too old, you know, if you're in your 50s, you are extremely likely past the age um, of conception, but doesn't mean you can't have a family. Doesn't mean you can't participate in a family. Topics of the infertility industry, and then as we get to those more advanced ages, topics of the adoption industry are very sensitive and will have to be discussed at another time. I don't believe that adoption is a solution to people who can't have babies. I believe that adoption is traumatic, and there are others maybe that I can invite on to share more about that, that are more informed. But I am the daughter of an adoptee, and I have experienced the harms that are left by that, and that doesn't even touch on what we get into when we look at the transracial adoptee industry, the like international adoptee things, and all of that does tie us back to capitalism and this idea of buying and selling humans. Of hmm, yeah. Are we full circle yet? I think we are. So the last thing I'm going to throw up here, speaking of, actually, I didn't, this was not intentional, but someone who does have a lot of to say, or used to in the past. I think, you know, right now her work, this era of her work is right here for us. But she's touched before on her experience as a transracial adoptee. Um, I loved this little Substack from Kiki, Dr. Kiernan M. Steiner, the voice doula, who has some tips here of looking at your creativity next to your fertility and your reproductive cycles. So, Kiki has given birth. She was my virtual spirit doula client. That is the client that I worked with for 18 months prior to conception to alchemize different experiences and build her inner world through the birth realm. And she is on this really incredible journey in her life, where now she is bringing this creative care framework. So she looks at conception compared to inspiration, pregnancy as a creative process, birth as creative expression, and postpartum as integration. And so she, as we talked about tracking your cycle, she's giving you tips of tracking your creative cycle. And why I want to close with this is because this is not only metaphorical, this is literal to your creative wellness. If you want to start now, if you're thinking you want a baby one day, if you're starting in the early stages of cycle tracking, or maybe you're not even there yet to cycle tracking, how are you nurturing your creative wellness by making art, by transmuting emotions into something, into expression and tangible expressions of this emotional experience? How are you alchemizing your stories and making room in your energetic womb for these things? And in this Substack, Kiki gets into the like very literal things related to creativity that will absolutely be hand in hand with tending to your reproductive wellness. Eating whole foods, releasing stress and tension, self pleasure and intimacy, rest. So check that out. Loving the gifs that she's got here. This is me for sure. I really resonate with Kung Fu Panda on a spiritual level. Those movies, I think like the third one, I loved. I was like, yep, yep. It's very soft power. So I'm gonna leave us there for today. Thank y'all for being with me. Thank you for trusting me with having an opinion. I feel so much more connected and grounded through today's conversation, in terms of what to do and how to move forward. We, like the Justice card said, and whether you have children or not, it isn't exclusive to that ever. Um, I am here weekly because this is a ritual for me to tend to my creative cycle and my um, listen to my rhythms. And it may not be every single Wednesday. There may be weeks that I take off, but it's been part of my practice as really the past 2 weeks. Once I kicked this show off, I was like, on Wednesdays. I had this voice in me that was like, don't say every Wednesday, just say on Wednesdays. And then both this and last week, I had really, really big information and emotional disruptions come through uh, in my personal life, and it really helped me. It's helping me um, apply my practices as a doula in ways that I've described before in my newsletter. How 5 years ago, when I was going through the end of my marriage and the end of a pregnancy and family planning changes, um, I really had to lean. This is when the practices developed for me because I had clients I was committed to. I had to show up no matter what. And I shared that photo, I think, last week in my newsletter, which was this photo of me holding my client. And what many don't know about that photo is it looks just like a doula holding somebody birthing. She was a home birth in her bathroom. And I was wearing an adult diaper, passing a pregnancy, bleeding, and going through one of the hardest moments of my life. And I've questioned myself before because I've been accused from people I've had a lot of, family and whatever, close relationships who've been in conflict with me. And they're like, that's so crazy that you still show up, and like called me fake for it, called me, and like crazy for that. And I'm like, yeah, I do question myself if I'm crazy for still showing up the way that I did while going through personal deaths. And now at this moment in time, I'm seeing that this is exactly the moment I've been building and training for, because we have to find ways to navigate our personal tragedies, and there are many who have. That's why I always want to throw it back to learning from Black and Indigenous people, who have taught me so much about. I don't want to minimize it to resiliency, but that is what I've taken in many ways, to, growing up, especially in my teen years and my youth years, and seeing how Black friends, especially Black men right now, are on my heart. A couple close to me, that how they navigate the loss of their friends and death, and still choose to, how some in particular choose to transmute that and choose joy and all of that, is something to learn from. And I think what I appreciated about that Tarot for Pregnancy book is that we get a lot of we can often co-opt these messages of choosing joy as resistance, rest as resistance. And as a person who is white and Asian American and in a privileged enough position in my life, that actually isn't my resistance to model and kind of like own and claim and like proclaim to people. Yes, I choose rest. Is it a radical act of resistance for a white person to choose rest? Eh, like, kind of. Rest is important for everybody. But I think why I say that, and from the start of just this conversation of like what we're sharing online, how we're sharing, is like some of us do, I believe, have more responsibility to speak more directly to things, and never to martyr ourselves, but to be mindful of the privileges we have. Um, and we just have to go by our own inner authority, because there have been people who have had judgments on me of how I've shared and showed up in the last couple of years, dwindling about the frequency of sharing certain issues. And I'm like, I'm going to have to be good with my actions offline without proving to everybody. Hopefully these coughs go away. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.